friends. We are so excited to be with you today. I have an amazing, phenomenal guest with me, one of our very own V, who is going to be speaking to us about social work and mental health. And we're excited to have V join us because V is our own, very own social worker, has a lot of experience, a lot to say about mental health, and has been doing amazing work working in the school system in New York City. We're excited to have you, V, and we're going to get started in just a few moments. We're going to give people time to tune in. If you're tuning in from LinkedIn Live or YouTube or Facebook, we definitely want to acknowledge you. So put it in the comment section or chat with us, engage with us while you're on this. We definitely want to make sure we're lifting up comments as they're coming in. And if there are wisdom nuggets that you're hearing coming from myself or V, definitely put it into the chat box. We want this to be engaging. And also, we are asking everyone that's tuning in to help us out and share this message in this video because social work mental health is extremely important and we have to lift up these types of topics and raise awareness because we care about our social workers and because they are extremely essential and important to our society. So go ahead and share, comment, and thank you so much for tuning in. We'll get started in just a few moments. I also want to shout out all the social workers that are watching, especially on LinkedIn. If you're watching us from LinkedIn and you're a social worker, I want to take a moment to acknowledge you, recognize you, and to also celebrate you and thank you for all the work that you do within your agencies, within your roles, and within your communities. We truly do appreciate you. All right, let's get started. V, we are super, super excited to have you join us. I did not have the privilege of interviewing you a few weeks ago during the suicide live segment that we had, which was actually your idea, by the way. Unfortunately, I don't remember what happened that day, but I just wasn't available. But I know that you did amazing, and I heard great work about how well that segment went. But I am very honored to be able to chat with you today, to talk to you today about your experiences as a social worker and to lift up and elevate your voice and your message. I know that your voice has been very pivotal in the organization and the Department of Education. And I'm sure within your school now as you're pursuing your doctorate degree. So I'm excited to have you here, V. Thank you so much for joining while you're working at the same time.
Thank you for having me. Yes, I'm in the office in a school, so please.
We understand. So if there's any kids barging in, we definitely get it. Well, I want to formally introduce you to those that are watching and may not be familiar with you. V is a current school social worker at iRaise. Um, V was a former special education teacher. Currently, she is actually studying for her doctorate in curriculum and instruction at Fordham University. So shout out to Fordham. These focus um, and their MSW program was clinical mental health. So that's great. We're going to hear some great things from V with specific interest in trauma, suicide, and forensics. V's particular experience as a Black queer single parent from Harlem who experiences mental health issues and who has family history of mental health um, insinuates has propelled V to seek and create inclusive, trauma informed community spaces for marginalized people and people who experience mental health and trauma. So, again, formally welcoming you, V. Thank you so much for joining, and we're really excited to hear more about your expertise and just your passion for social work.
Yes, no
So,
problem. Me.
yeah, so let's jump right in. I actually wanted to start off by talking a little bit about your switch first from what appears to be education to social work, but kind of back into education as you're studying. What was it that sort of inspired you? I know most social workers that go into the field, there's usually a story behind that decision that motivated you to go into social work. For you, yours is very interesting because you were once a former special education teacher, but then chose to go into social work. What was that like for you? What really inspired that switch?
So being a special education teacher means a lot of mental health issues not recognized formally. That first kind of enjoy teaching, but there's so much teachers need that is not being offered. It be just like training to deal with students. We're dealing with poverty. We're dealing with community things. Um, dealing with that. Um, there's a training that you get when you're teaching is, and most of the work you're expected to do academics. But I personally started students I was particularly working with in areas mostly Black and brown students. It wasn't like they couldn't, because I was mostly teaching math. It was actually that were more important than math. And so like, well, if you're trying to survive, how are we actually, when we minimize that and keep that in my idea was switching to a person that can kind of like help teach. Hey, I have so much going on and I'm just trying to teach. So I'm actually able to deal outside of the classroom, but my to create a modeling for urban schooling kind of weaves the two together. You get about you know, a model in mental health and things like that, not secondary, but they're actually within the school day. Where I'm
I
going
love
with
that
that.
so much. Bringing the two together, and just so you know, your phone or whatever device you're using is going out, so we're hearing like every other word.
Oh,
So I'll try to give you a moment to like adjust it as I fill in a gap. But I love what you said when you talked about the education piece and then the aspect of dealing with children outside of the classroom. We have a lot of conversations in our meetings, and we do a lot of brainstorming and strategic planning about ways that we can integrate mental health into the education setting. And it's been a challenge. We've done as a fishbone exercise where we talked about where the problems are deriving from when kids in public schools, namely, are having mental health issues and they're not being met. Why are kids' mental health needs not being met? We talked about a lot of the root causes of that. Some of it being capitalism going on, some of it being racism, or just schools not being prepared or equipped enough to handle kids' mental health, not having the correct or adequate amount of support or resources to help kids. And so the idea of integrating the two and just your passion or your love for that, it is so in line and step with the work of the agency. And we have been seeing the great work that you've been doing in terms of your ideas and the innovation that you bring. And I think you bring such a unique perspective because you were a former special education teacher. And I think that has helped you even in your role as a school social worker.
thank
To see if
you.
you're audio is a little, if it's a little clearer, if you want to try to test it out. You
Is
definitely
it any
hear,
is it any better?
it's like it's going out still.
Let me see
Hmm.
my earphones in.
Yeah, I would definitely try the earpiece and see if that works. And thank you all for your patience, for bearing with us. V is actually in one of our schools that whose service is not the best. And I I remember being in that school and not being able to get any kind of service at all. So I definitely know what it's like sitting trying to get Wi-Fi signal. You want to test it out now? Nope, we didn't hear that.
Can you hear me now?
That's better, but it's still a little staticky, but that's much better than what it was before.
I'll stick with this. You can hear
Yep.
me.
It
Okay.
definitely sounds a little better. Mhm. Well, we talked a little bit about your education and you making that segue into social work from special education, but I'm curious to know what it's been like for you. If I remember correctly, you're newer in the field of social work, and so at what about 3 years postgraduate? Is that correct? Thereabout.
Yep.
Yep. So you were actually one of the newer social workers in the height of the pandemic, and I'm wondering what was that like for you, as you were coming into the field of social work and in a world where there was active pandemic happening. What was that experience like for you?
Mm, Part of it was like it just shifted. Good part of it was that I was ending of the pandemic started. It was like I think what would have been already have been in the field and kind of had to, it was nice having just come out of school to tell and be in the pandemic. It was like, okay, I see where I'm coming. A lot of virtual counseling going on. There's also virtual meeting, and there's actually flexibility that I think would not have been built at most in most organizations, just all across the world. I think I appreciate that because I think everyone to open their minds to new possibilities and, and cause certain change to happen. But I do think that there are challenges adjusting to that. Like even right now, but we're doing something that it's been like in the last year or two, a lot of online meeting, playing around with new technology. So it's that way to be accessible and to have a further it is an adjustment. It is an adjustment. It makes me hopeful that quicker than we previously probably thought different ways.
Yeah, I love that, and I think you depicted it well. It's interesting when you're coming right into the field of social work and a middle of a pandemic, and you're pivoting, but you're pivoting within early on in your career. I'm wondering for those that were in their career longer and that had a lot more tenure, what it was like to transition from doing everything in person with clients to a whole new world, which was online. And I know that, especially during a pandemic, there was a lot of questions about are social workers essential? When there were mandates out for only those that are essential workers would be the ones that would be working. We, of course, were like, well, we're essential. we are essential workers. We're the ones keeping things in order, especially socially. Mental health services are essential, child protective services, all the roles in which we hold in society. But there were a lot of questions in the very beginning about whether social workers were essential. And of course, we did meet that threshold of being essential workers. Being that we are so essential to society, and during the time of the pandemic, there was a lot of trauma happening, especially in our communities of color, losing lots of loved ones and neighbors and community members during the pandemic, and social workers being the ones that were really on the ground, meeting families where they are, where they were, in the middle of the chaos and just trying to stabilize families. Do you believe that that had an effect, if any, on social workers' mental health? I'd like for you to speak a little to that, in your opinion.
I think it had an effect. I think that it. I think the hard part is people lean on when their mental health or when they, need some emotional social support. I I think you we were in crisis and so many things to mention for those who are Black or person of color in the movement that was going strong. It kind of came together that if you were a social worker, I think for sure there was a lot of issues propping up because I can't get my needs met, right? An essential worker, but also just I'm adjusting to this, I'm adjusting to that, to the supermarket before curfew, and clients who previously were in person clients can't access internet, and like my job just got a lot harder, but it was also so many people for mental health support during the pandemic. A long wait for everyone. I think that like people's caseloads, there was a lot of adjust day life, and then a lot of people just didn't get the mental health that they needed, and to this day, I think there's a high need for social workers and for other mental people are dealing with a lot, and they're starting to address that. I think like now people seek a social worker or seek as I don't think that lasts. Um, I think in the pandemic, definitely hordes of can't deal with this, or there's so many changes to someone on a consistent basis. Mental health issues for social workers rose like a lot um workers plate, and just to be again that is it puts a lot of responses for sure.
You actually talked about caseloads, which I think is really important when we're talking about social work burnout and social work mental health. Um, Before I go into caseload, I actually wanted to read the definition of what burnout is. Burnout is real, and burnout, in particular, with social workers, is very um, unique because social workers are consistently at risk for, they're high risk for burnout, because social workers are consistently exposed to the effects of trauma and poverty and social and racial inequity on a daily basis. So when you're in a job that is chronically stressful, it can create that exhaustion that will lead to burnout. And so, because of that, social workers are tend to be at high risk of burnout because of the nature of their job being very demanding. And one of the major demands is caseloads. In fact, I was reading up on something the other day, and the recommended average, national average for caseloads, for one student to one social worker was 250 students to one social worker. Now that sounds like a lot, right? And it is. But the actual average of social workers to students in the DOE is about 1 to 500. And in the New York State it's 1 to 800, which means one social worker to 800 students. It's impossible for that social worker to see, and to really properly treat any client. If you have 800 or 500 or even 400 clients on your caseload, there's no way to see those clients one-on-one, which means that a lot of clients unfortunately are not being seen, are not receiving adequate time with social workers. But then that also means that social workers are stretched thin, and they're also burning out. Unfortunately, many social workers are experiencing burnout, especially those that work in the school system. So I'm wondering if you can speak more to what that looks like, especially for you being a school social worker, not working with the DOE, but working with a community-based organization. What have you noticed, and anything that you can speak to really raise awareness on burnout and reference to caseloads?
Yeah, I burnout is real. Um, and I think saw a lot with the employment crisis, as it was called, high stressful incentives, right? Like, I think for certain professions, as teaching, those sort of helping field, yeah, is not in the paycheck. It is in you've helped someone else and that you're making the. That being said, I think a lot of social workers and help experience burnout at a higher rate. It's expected that that's all you should. There are so pushed to, like you said, there's this big caseload one, but what about the supports? I, I have something going on, or what about if everything on? And so it's like you're and I think that hamster wheel leads to burnout, especially when there's nothing. It's the word I want to use, like like you know um how um fun things you have with your coworkers, or having an assistant, or having acknowledgement, even acknowledgement again goes back to the your expect person that just works because you want to. Great, but as humans we need breaks. We need rest. And so I think that burnout has a lot to do. It's an opinion. It's often a top-down effect. Like, it's if people that are doing work with communities are not taken care of, and they're left with all the responsibility, then there's going to be people who say, listen, 30 years, I have a family, like, I just want to be able to leave my work at home. And I think that other things play into, like, sometimes there's burnout. Not only is it hard to get that momentum, there's a lot of like vicarious trauma. It's um like I don't know if I have the. So again, I just think like building that station, and even use care models. I think those are really, there's a lot of really community care practices. I think that I burn out.
Thank you for mentioning that. You talked about vicarious trauma, which is also something that can lead to burnout. It is not burnout, but it can contribute to burnout. And it is something that, a lot of social workers may also experience and may not realize, um, which is why it's important. I think you mentioned V having that community of care as a social worker. I'm not sure if that's what it was. Your phone, your device is still going in and out, but I think that's what I caught was having that community of care. Is that correct?
Yes. Yep. Having
Yeah.
a model where everyone's kind of like taking care of each other, and it's not just care, when you need a break, but guys is checking on you, and you're checking on your spaces where we're taking care of each other and at the fact that we're all human.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, and just to, I love that idea of community of care, and it definitely sounds like this is something that can be done and or on an organizational level. So if you're working, you're a social worker and you have colleagues that are also social workers, having those check-ins and creating that sense of community where you are all looking out for each other and you're noticing. I think teachers may even do this well. You're noticing if your colleague that's a social worker is appearing to be overly stressed or chronically stressed or overwhelmed, or they look like they're at their breaking point. Being able to create a community of care model to support one another, I think definitely makes a difference and does help to create that mental health that social workers need on the job. And I think sometimes we don't really think about the fact that because social workers are working with people and supporting their well-being, that they also need that support too. And so it's important that our workplaces are allowing social workers to be supported, and that is valuing and also just recognizing like this is hard. You got a lot of cases. Recognizing the what it takes, the amount of work that's on their plate, I think is also really important, especially in workplaces. I know we're winding down, but I also wanted to jump into two last things. The first is the idea of compassion fatigue. And this is also different from burnout, but compassion fatigue is real. And a lot of social workers and also just people that work that are in the industry or in the field of helping others can feel and experience this. And so I wanted to sort of just provide a definition for compassion fatigue and then have you speak to whether this is something you've ever noticed as a school social worker, whether you've ever, this is something you felt. Because I think this is also important to raise because compassion fatigue, although it's not burnout, it can also lead to burnout. And so compassion fatigue, for those that may have never heard of this term, it is a term that describes the physical, emotional, and psychological impact of helping others, often through experiences of stress or trauma. It's often mistaken for burnout, but it's not burnout. It's cumulative, and it's a sense of fatigue or dissatisfaction. I also like to call it indifference. So when you're consistently exposed to people that are dealing with trauma and you're consistently helping others, you can become very indifferent to the suffering. Have you ever noticed that happening? And I know you're still kind of early on in your career, you're about 3 years in, but even in that amount of time, can you speak to whether you felt that compassion fatigue?
Um, well, I think compassion for to me it connects to. I find them to be at the opposite. I think in on one end you have people are going through stuff and you're taking it. feeling like it happened to you, and you've been through these traumas because you're heavy stuff. Um, you get to a point where like you're just so you hear something intense, or this person's going through, really, it kind of, you can't register. There's no like, the level of empathy that that you can apply. Um, these things happen on a spectrum, but I think to me, I'm not there. Um, it has to do too with self care and training too, and understand how to like, but not take things home. How to, but still to be present, be in the middle. You can't, you know, be something and you're like sobbing. You're like, I can't deal with nightmares at night. But you, wow, that happened to you. Okay, it's happened. You know, you have to show empathy. You have to help people working them on. It's almost like you're right, and they're unloading it and kind of like guiding them how to unload it, like taking it home with you now, and that gets. But I do think that you be present, and you have to guide them through. Compassion fatigue is, and it's something that I work. Um, you have to deal with, deal with hearing people's trauma all the time, and a lot of us are desensitized in general. A whole other story, but I think we do experience this day and age desensitized, especially like all the time, to the point where we're like, oh wow, that can't even work up the the sadness or anything anymore. It is very similar to, and hearing things all the time painful, and I think mechanism is to try to detach. And I think using your peers to, talk about and releasing, think, being self-aware, understanding when having vicarious trauma, or okay, I can't hold this particularly triggering. When you're going through that process, or the opposite, right? Like you're thinking, so you're putting up this wall. You're not able to fully be present with people. You're not able to like put them first. Having therapy in their session, training and support that needs to happen, not to have compassion fatigue. Otherwise, coping mechanism, I guess, not to be drained every single day. I think it's something that's an everyday battle. I might not, I might be low in an emotional capacity right now, and how do I say, hey, it's time to take a mental health day? I can't show up to people, and I don't want, like, being able to sit with them and reach. But I'm like where I'm there, but I like, let me reschedule this 2 days from now, because my capacity is low, and like I went to service. So there are.
Those are really great points, and you also talked about that very delicate balance between being having vicarious trauma and sort of being swallowed into the trauma of your clients and those that you work with, and then becoming so disconnected and detached from the trauma. So it's almost like the balance and also just the struggle and a fight between this is so horrible, this is happening to my clients. I'm having nightmares about it now and I can't sleep at night. I'm thinking about it or it's reminding me of something I went through. It's triggering things in me to this is so much that I have to detach from it. So sometimes it sounds like compassion fatigue could even be a coping mechanism for your own brain to be able to balance so that it's not feeling so overwhelmed with other people's trauma. I think these are conversations that are so real. We got to have these more because the fact of the matter is we are dealing with life or death situations sometimes on a day to day. We're making crucial decisions that are going to affect people's well-being and their life. And in turn, the thing about it is, you said something important, V. You can't do this work detached. So you got to bring your heart into it. You have to do this with your heart because if you're not going to make the right decisions. Because when you're making decisions for people's lives or helping people make decisions for their lives, you can't do it without your heart in it. But how do you keep your heart in it and don't feel that burnout? That is the delicate balance that I think social workers are consistently trying to figure out. And it's not an easy prescription. There is no method to say, plug this in and it works. Um, it really requires us knowing our emotional capacity, also workplaces being more aware of ways in which we may even be complicit and contributing to that, that compassion fatigue and that burnout, and also looking at things systemically, our policies and our systems, and how that may also play into social work burnout. So it sounds like this is really a multi-tier approach, but I think it's crucial that we're being real about these things. And you talked about something also important, V, and you said having that peer support, talking to peers, and not everyone has the um, privilege of having social work colleagues. Some people are the only social workers. And then not everyone has the privilege of having social work supervisors. Some people's supervisors are not social workers. So for those that are on jobs where they're the only social worker, it's even more challenging and even more difficult for those individuals. So I'm just wondering if there is, and I know you had to jump up really quickly and open the door, but I'm wondering if there's like one piece of advice that you sort of just could provide to social workers that may be on the job and may be the only social worker there and don't have that peer support to talk to other people about what their experience is and burnout is like. And then also, what do you think workplaces can do to better support social workers' mental health?
I think so. You brought up caseload before. One of the things I think re-examining and how exact is to if I'm seeing 20 people in one day and I truly engage with empathy and compassion that I need without maybe that's in where it's like, okay, now I'm on let's just get it over with. And so and what compliance looks like in your actually feasible the community, what is serving your state. It's really helpful. I would say for people who I know that's really hard because people don't listen. I think you can do this. So this being able to speak up for yourself, use the literature. Use the literature. You just sat here and gave us a definition, which I'm sure many people haven't even had recently gone to a professional development between professional burnout And that was helpful for me. And again, there goes like words that help me explain that being said. And if your organization doesn't have the language, but find a TED talk, find something that's it's documented, find some research and talk for you, because then you can say, and because clearly, I mean, if it's sometimes the problem is, it's honored. Not this, not respected, but it's just not honored. But this is the policy. If you can't do this, like, hey, here's the research. It's not just me. And, like, you have to be aware of these important concepts and about this in a modern day and age, because we're expected to do. Our policies haven't changed in years, but the truth people have, how we engage, expected to do has. And so kind of front and saying, like, maybe we should actually look at what policies are working, what aren't, systems we can change, and always, and try to constantly be getting to know yourself, self-aware. The better I become, the better I can communicate needs, the better I can supervise, speak into, and help empowerment in that language, to do the self-awareness, self-care.
I love those tips for you. That's amazing. I'm gonna recap some of the things you said, and then I'll add one thing to it. But you talked about using the literature. I think that's great, and you are correct. Some people have never heard of compassion fatigue or vicarious trauma, or those kind of things, and maybe experiencing it. So when you know what you're experiencing, it does help you when you're able to name it and say, "Oh, that's why I feel." That's what I'm feeling. And now it helps you because now you realize that it's common and it's not something that's abnormal. And then you can sort of start to work towards getting the help that you need to bring you back into balance. Um, I love the TED Talks. I love TED Talks. I am a person that loves to listen to it for inspiration and definitely encourage others, even if you're not a social worker, whatever profession you are. TED Talks are super amazing. You can find something useful on it. They're very inspiring. And then self awareness, that's huge. And sometimes we don't realize how important self awareness is. But when we are not self aware, we actually don't know what our emotional capacity is and is not. Sometimes we're consistently acting like superheroes. So we're like, I got the S on my chest and I'm a superhero and I can do it. But knowing your limits and knowing your capacities as a human being is important, because when you're not self-aware, you'll take on so much and then you'll be like, wait a minute, I'm starting to break down. My body's starting to break down. That is because you are probably going towards the down, unfortunately, the pathway of burnout, and that's the pathway we don't want you on at all. And so there are things that your body will tell you before you get there, and it's different for everyone. Some of you, it might be headaches. You might just get headaches. That might be like an indication of you're taking on too much. For others, it might be memory loss. You may start forgetting things, or it might be pain in your body, or it might even be anxiety, or just your blood pressure going up, or low blood pressure, or not eating, or forgetting to eat, just these are things that are indicators, depending on the way you sort of manage yourself, that can be signs that you may be going into burnout. And so it's important that you know yourself and that you know what your capacity is, because when you know it, now you're able to really set the balance that you need to in order to be healthy. um, when you're flying on a plane and God forbid if something happens and those masks go down, you cannot help, not even your child, until you pull that mask down and put it on yourself and help yourself. And we have to keep that image in our head, especially as social workers, that we're in the business of helping people. We're in the business of impacting lives, but we have to also help ourselves and impact our own life in order to be most effective to those around us. And so, V, I love those strategies that you gave us. But one last thing I'll leave, especially for those that are on jobs and workplaces that are not connected to social workers. And I know what that's like because I was working in a job prior to working with I Raised many years ago, where I also was the only social worker on the job. And I craved another social worker to be able to connect with. I was like, anyone, please, I need a social worker. They understand me. They speak my language, and it's always very uplifting when you're amongst your own, right? And so what I did, what I'm challenging others to do, is join your local NASW branch. So for those that are in New York City, it would be National Association of Social Workers, New York City chapter. There's a chapter in every state. It's a great way to be plugged into other social workers and plug. I also do serve as the vice president of the board of the New York City chapter. And so I do encourage others to get connected and get plugged in. Many years ago, before I was, full time as a CEO at iRaise, I was working at another job. And I can tell you, when I got connected to my local chapter, it really did support me a lot. So I definitely encourage others to get connected so that you can have that support group and have that peer group where you can talk through these issues that you're dealing with as social workers and support one another, because we really do need the power of the collective to really help us get through a lot of the issues that we're facing in our workplaces, and even sometimes have to take back home. So, V, it's been a pleasure. And then to those that are supervisors, managers, employers, there are things that we can do to value our social workers. We are not perfect at iRaise, but we try our best to uh, have little initiatives to really support our social workers. One of the things that we were able to implement were mental health days. And I will be taking one shortly, by the way. Um, they're once a month, and social workers and really anyone in the organization can take mental health days. They don't have to say, you don't have to give us an explanation and taking that mental health day. No one bothers you. We understand. We leave you alone. Take it. You need it. We also try to recognize and value our social workers, elevate their voices because they have a lot to contribute to workplaces. So I encourage supervisors, managers, executives of other companies to really elevate your social worker's voice. Don't not give them a seat at the table. Social workers deserve a seat at the table, even in decision making. Bring them into meetings. Sometimes V's called on. She's like, what am I doing in this meeting? Why am I here? I'm like, V, we need your voice because it's powerful, because you have something to say, and because you are, valuable, and also you are bringing and contributing something valuable to the agency. And we have to allow our social workers that opportunity to be able to express and elevate and lift up their voices. And social workers also need to feel empowered, and we have to make sure that our workplaces are not disempowering social workers, but that they are empowering them. And that would truly help to support their mental health. And then remember, social workers are humans. We are people. Hello. We bleed. We go to the doctor too. We are people, and so it's important that you see us as such. We have limits too. And so check in with a social worker. If you're not one, check on them, see how they're doing, and be there, be that support to them, because one day they might need you. They might need that smile, or that they might need that soft, warm greeting or nice encouragement from you. So don't underestimate the power of also empowering and encouraging social workers. So thank you, V. It's been a pleasure. We went way over time, and I know you got to get back to work. So, any last words you want to share with those who are watching before we end our time together?
I think you've said it all. I do like what you said to join that. I actually definitely still have work. And also, for those who are not as familiar with social work, more familiar. Like there are so many things, you know, from case management to just like so policy, people who consult on policies and who have management and things like that. Like there's so many different things that social workers do. And I would say, you know, raise awareness that we exist and that we do things in communities. That's about it.
I love that. I love that. Raise awareness and redefine the face of social work. And I
Yeah.
think you were he's also speaking to that systems. The world in which we lived 20 years ago no longer exists, but our policies still do, right? So how do we redefine and reimagine and upgrade our systems to match the world in which we live today? Thank you so much, V. We appreciate you. I appreciate you. I value you, all that you bring to the table. You are definitely an asset to iRaise, and we love your voice, love you, and continue. We're just excited to continue the great work as we continue partnering with you and changing lives of our children in New York City. Thank you so much, V,
Thank
for joining.
you
Thank you, and thank
for
you all for.
everyone.
We'll see you again actually this Thursday. We will be tuning back in for our fireside chat on Thursday. And then we have a great, exciting announcement next week, November the 8th. We will actually be launching an in person podcast and ATL. So we're excited about that, and we'll be giving some more information on that soon. So thank you all so much for watching. We appreciate you. And thank you all for your support. Remember to encourage a social worker today. Remember, social workers are essential and our mental health matters as we continue to ensure that our communities have the support that they need. Continue to also empower a social worker. Thank you all again, and we'll see you again soon.